Installing Joomla on a host. In this lesson, we'll discuss how you can select a host, how to set your host up, how to set up the database, and then I'll show you an example of actually creating the database in order to start up Joomla. First, need to select your host. There are a couple of things you want to think about when you're determining what host to use for your Joomla site. Number one, you want to make sure it has the minimum requirements for Joomla. To find out the requirements for Joomla, visit www.joomla.org/about. You should contact your host and ask them about their Joomla support, and make sure they're comfortable with the Joomla content management system. You should also ask about what their backup procedures are and general support. So for example, they may say they have backups of your site. You want to know how many copies they have available, how easy it is to restore, just in case there's a problem. Once you select your host, you will get the login information from them via email. Log into your cPanel or whatever the host management tool that you have. Make sure to write down the IP address, the user ID, and your password. Chances are this is also your FTP user ID and the FTP password. When you're setting up your cPanel, you want to write down the following information. When you create the database, write down the database name, the database user ID, and the database password. In addition, you may need to know what the database host name is. You may also need to add the user to the database if necessary. Let's go through a sample of creating the database on a cPanel. I've already logged into a sample cPanel account. I need to create a database, so I go through the cPanel to find the database area, which is towards the bottom on this specific cPanel. I click on MySQL Databases, and then to create the database, I just give it a name. I'm just going to give it DB. Now note, in this system, the full database name is joomtest_db, and then I click on Create Database. My next step is to create a user for this database. And again, it already has the prefix of joomtest_. I'm just going to give it user. Next, I will give it a password. And then click on Create User. After I've created the user and the database, I can now add this user to the database. So I have to scroll down to the bottom and I can see Add User to Database. By default, it has my user of joomtest user and my database, joomtest_db. And I just click on Add. And I want to give this user all privileges. Now that I've created the database, the next thing I need to verify is what the FTP user ID and password is. So I can return back to home. And I want to go to the FTP users, or in this case, it's called FTP accounts. Here I will create an FTP user for my account. I'll give it a password. For the folder, I'm going to make sure it just goes to public HTML instead of a specific folder, and then I can click on Create FTP Account. And now my account is created. In this lesson, we discussed how to select a host, how to set it up, how to set up your database, an example of creating the database, and then lastly, how to create an FTP account.